They say you can tell when someone's lying. It's in the little things, the quick shift of the eyes, a delay in their response, or how their tone drops ever so slightly. With Ashley, my wife of 11 years, those changes came subtly at first. Maybe I didn't want to believe them. Maybe I ignored what I shouldn't have, like a man trying to protect himself from a truth he knows will shatter his world. It began with the phone. Ashley had never been obsessed with hers before. She'd leave it lying around the house, face up, unlocked, without a second thought. But not anymore. Suddenly it was always in her pocket or clutched tightly in her hand. If she left it on the nightstand, it was always face down. And if a message came through, she'd pick it up quickly, brushing it off like it was nothing important. Then there were the calls, always taken outside or in another room, her voice hushed. I'd ask who it was, and her answer would come just a little too late. "Oh, just work stuff," she'd say with a forced smile. Work. Always work. I didn't want to press too hard. I thought maybe she was stressed. Her firm had been pushing big projects recently, and she mentioned they were short-staffed. It made sense, until it didn't. She started going out more, usually at night. "Girls' night," she'd explain casually. I never questioned it at first. I figured it was good for her to have a life outside of our marriage. I didn't want to be that guy, the overbearing husband who questions every move his wife makes. But her outings became more frequent, and the excuses started sounding flimsy. I couldn't ignore the tension in her voice or the way her eyes shifted when she thought I wasn't looking. Then, there was the scent. It's funny, the things you notice when suspicion takes hold. The perfume she wore on her way out the door would sometimes be stronger when she came home than when she left. I'm not a detective, but I knew what that likely meant. Reapplying perfume at night? For what reason, unless there was someone she didn't want me to smell? But the real shift came after a conversation I overheard late one evening. I had gotten up for a glass of water, and Ashley was upstairs. I heard her voice carrying softly down the hall. "No, he doesn't know. Stop worrying. I'll see you tomorrow." My heart stopped mid-beat. I froze in place, straining to hear more, but by the time I moved closer, the conversation had ended. I stood there, paralyzed in the dark. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming at me, but I didn't march upstairs and confront her. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd find. Maybe I hoped there was still some innocent explanation for all this. But after that, the cracks were impossible to ignore. She'd mentioned things that didn't add up, like an outing with coworkers that didn't match up with the ones she'd supposedly despised. There were sudden late-night texts, strange gaps in her schedule, and vague explanations. I started wondering if I was going insane, seeing betrayal where there wasn't any. I tried to be subtle about my concerns. "Is everything all right?" I asked one morning over coffee. She seemed surprised but recovered quickly. "Yeah, just a lot going on at work." "Why do you ask?" Her voice was light, but her eyes were guarded. I pushed a little further. "You've just seemed distracted lately. Maybe we should plan a weekend away or something, just the two of us." She laughed, though it didn't sound natural. "Paranoid much?" "I'm fine, really." But I wasn't fine. Her words were designed to deflect, to make me second-guess myself. I couldn't let it go. I started paying closer attention, watching her, listening for inconsistencies. And soon enough, she gave me a reason to act. It was a Friday evening when she told me she had a business dinner with a coworker named Alex, a man she had always spoken about with disdain. She made it seem like an obligation. "I don't want to go, but I have to. He's the project lead," she said, slipping into her shoes. I nodded, playing along, but the gears in my mind were already turning. Why would she suddenly agree to meet with someone she disliked? I waited until she left, then grabbed my keys and followed her. I tailed her car at a safe distance, my heart racing with anticipation. She wasn't heading to any familiar place. She drove across town, finally pulling into the parking lot of a restaurant. But instead of going inside, she waited. I parked out of sight and watched. Minutes passed. Then, A black sedan pulled into the lot. I tensed as a man stepped out and approached her car. The streetlight illuminated his face, and my blood ran cold. He looked just like me. Not just similar, a near mirror image. He had my height, my build, even my haircut. He leaned down and spoke to Ashley through the window before she got out of the car. They hugged briefly, then walked toward the entrance together. I sat in stunned silence, my mind racing. Who was this man? Why did he look like me? And why was Ashley meeting him in secret? Whatever this was, I knew one thing: my life was about to change in ways I couldn't have imagined. I stayed parked in the shadows outside the restaurant, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My eyes were locked on the entrance, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. Ashley had hugged that man. Not just a casual hug, a slow, intimate one. The kind you'd expect between two people who knew each other well. Too well. But that wasn't the part one couldn't wrap my head around. It was the way the man looked, how eerily similar he was to me. I had never believed in coincidences, and this sure as hell wasn't one. I debated going inside. Every instinct told me to march in there and confront them both. Demand answers right then and there. But something held me back. If I barged in, Ashley would just find a way to lie. I'd seen her in action before, how quick she was on her feet with excuses when something didn't go her way. I needed proof. Cold, hard proof. So I sat there, my mind racing. I watched as the two of them took a booth near the restaurant's window. They were seated close, heads tilted toward each other in conversation. I could see the way she smiled at him, the same smile she used to give me. My stomach twisted painfully. It was like watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. Everything I thought I knew about my wife, about our marriage, was unraveling right before my eyes. I grabbed my phone and snapped a few photos through the windshield. The quality wasn't great, but it was enough to capture them together. As I lowered the phone, I asked myself the question that had been gnawing at me since I first saw them together. Who the hell is this guy? It couldn't be a coincidence. His face, his mannerisms, even the way he moved, it was all too familiar. The resemblance wasn't normal. He looked like a version of me, maybe a few years younger. But I didn't have a twin. At least, not that I knew of. Suddenly, a memory surfaced, something my mother had said years ago, during one of her drunken rants when I was a teenager. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table, trying to ignore her as she rambled on about family secrets. "You wouldn't understand," she'd said, her voice slurred. "You don't even know the whole story. Things were complicated when you were born." At the time, I'd dismissed it as just another one of her drunken tirades. But now, for the first time, I wondered if there had been some truth to her words. Could I have a brother? A twin even? And if so, why the hell hadn't I ever been told? I shook my head. This was all too much. I wasn't going to get any answers just sitting in my car, spiraling through half-baked theories. I needed to know what Ashley was up to. I stayed parked for the next hour, watching as their dinner played out like some twisted reality show. They laughed, talked, and even leaned into each other in ways that made my stomach churn. Eventually, they stood up and left the restaurant. I tensed, expecting them to go their separate ways. But no. They walked back to Ashley's car together. The man kissed her on the cheek before opening the driver's side door for her. I felt a surge of anger flood through me. I fought the urge to storm out and confront them right then and there. Instead, I waited for her to pull out of the parking lot, then followed at a distance. Ashley didn't go home. She drove across town to a small, upscale motel, the kind that catered to people who didn't want to be seen. She parked near one of the far corners of the lot. The man followed her in his own car. I watched from across the street as they checked in together, their body language relaxed and familiar. There was no hesitation between them. No guilt. They knew exactly what they were doing. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. This was beyond just an affair. This was something far deeper, far more calculated. And I needed to find out exactly how long this had been going on. I stayed in the car for another hour, stewing in a toxic mix of rage and heartbreak. Eventually, I drove back home, my mind numb. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the images of Ashley and that man flashing through my mind like a horror reel. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this go unanswered. There were too many questions. Too many secrets. Ashley had no idea I knew, and I was going to use that to my advantage. If she thought she could get away with this, she was dead wrong. I waited 2 days before I confronted Ashley. 2 long, agonizing days where I pretended like everything was normal. I went through the motions, waking up, going to work, coming home, and sharing meals with her, all while keeping my rage bottled up inside. It felt like living a lie within a lie. She didn't notice a thing. That was the part that hurt the most. She carried on as if nothing had happened, smiling at me over breakfast, scrolling through her phone at night. I wondered how many times she had sat across from me like this after meeting with him. How many times had she lied straight to my face? By the time the second evening rolled around, I couldn't take it anymore. I had spent hours reviewing the photos and tracker data I collected. My mind kept looping back to that one moment, the kiss on the cheek outside the motel. That image was burned into my brain. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to wait another damn second to get them. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, humming softly under her breath. It was the kind of scene you'd see in a picture-perfect marriage. But the reality behind it was anything but perfect. "Hey," I said, leaning against the doorway. My voice was too calm, almost mechanical. She glanced up at me and smiled. "Hey! You're home early," she said. "I was just getting started on dinner. How was work?" "Fine." I crossed my arms and watched her. She kept humming and slicing vegetables, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in the room. I waited a few more seconds, letting the tension hang in the air. Then I spoke again, this time with a razor-sharp edge to my voice. "We need to talk." She froze mid-slice. Her hand hovered over the cutting board for a moment before she slowly set the knife down. "Talk about what?" she asked, her tone guarded now. "About where you've really been going at night," I said, my eyes boring into her. Ashley blinked, her mouth opening slightly as if to respond, but no words came out. For the first time, I saw real fear flash across her face. She quickly masked it with a nervous laugh. "What are you talking about?" "I told you, work stuff, meetings, sometimes dinner with coworkers." I shook my head slowly. Don't insult my intelligence, Ashley. I followed you. I know you've been meeting him. I know about the motel." Her face went pale, and she took a step back. "You followed me?" she whispered. "Yeah, I did. And I saw everything. I saw you with him." I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my voice steady. "So why don't you go ahead and tell me the truth for once?" Ashley looked like a deer caught in headlights. She opened and closed her mouth a few times, clearly scrambling for an explanation. When none came, she crossed her arms over her chest, her expression hardening. "You had no right to follow me," she spat. "That's a massive invasion of my privacy." I barked out a bitter laugh. "Privacy? Are you serious? You're going to stand there and lecture me about privacy after sneaking around with some other guy? It's not what you think," she blurted out suddenly. Her voice cracked with desperation. "I was going to tell you, but I didn't know how." "You didn't know how to tell me you were cheating on me? That's rich, Ashley. You've been lying to me for months, maybe longer." "And for what?" "For him? Who the hell is he?" Her eyes darted to the floor. She bit her lip and took a deep breath, as if bracing herself for impact. "His name is Michael," she said softly. Michael. So now he had a name. "And who is he? Someone from work?" Ashley hesitated again. "No. He's someone I found recently. He looks like you, right?" Hearing her say it out loud made my blood run cold. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, he does. Care to explain why?" Her gaze flicked toward the window, as though searching for an escape. Finally, she whispered, "He's your brother. Your twin." I froze. For a moment I thought I'd misheard her. "What? Your twin?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "I found him about a year ago. I didn't tell you because I was angry. I wanted answers, about your family, your past, and he gave them to me." I staggered back, my mind reeling. Twin? Brother? None of this made sense. "You went behind my back to find him? And then what, Ashley? You decided to have an affair out of revenge?" She winced, guilt etched into every line of her face. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I was angry at you for things you didn't tell me. I wanted to hurt you." My vision blurred with rage. "Congratulations. You succeeded." Silence filled the room as we stared at each other, both knowing there was no going back from this. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Twin brother. I kept repeating them in my mind, trying to make sense of them, but the concept wouldn't settle. It was like trying to fit a piece into a puzzle that didn't belong. Ashley stood across from me, looking shaken but defiant, as though daring me to challenge her. I wanted to. Hell, I wanted to shout at her, demand answers, throw the nearest object against the wall. But all I could do was stand there, numb, caught between shock and disbelief. "You're telling me I have a twin brother?" I finally said, my voice flat. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a declaration of how absurd this entire situation was. She nodded hesitantly. "Yes. His name is Nick. I found him last year." "How?" I demanded. "How the hell did you find someone I didn't even know existed?" Ashley glanced down at the counter, avoiding my gaze. "It wasn't intentional. It started when I came across some old records in your parents' things I don't think you ever knew about. I was cleaning out the attic and found a box of hospital documents from when you were born. There was a record for twins. I thought it was a mistake, so I did some digging." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Twins? Why the hell hadn't my parents ever told me this? I thought back to my childhood, to my mother's strange, drunken ramblings about complicated family issues. I had always brushed them off as nonsense, a symptom of her alcoholism. But what if she had been trying to tell me the truth all along? "Go on," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "What else did you dig up without telling me?" Ashley swallowed hard. I hired a private investigator. He found Nick. He was adopted by a different family after you two were separated. He lives in the next state over. At first, I wasn't sure if I should reach out to him, but I was angry at you, Jake. You were distant, always working. I wanted answers, and when I met Nick... Her voice trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks myself. She had met him and, somewhere along the way, crossed a line she couldn't uncross. "You wanted answers, so you went behind my back," I said coldly. "Then, instead of coming to me with what you found, you decided to start an affair with him?" Ashley winced. "It wasn't supposed to be like that," she whispered. "At first, we were just talking. I was trying to understand your past, why you never opened up about your family. But things got complicated." "Complicated," I repeated bitterly. "Yeah, I bet it did. Jesus, Ashley. Do you even hear yourself? You slept with a man who looks exactly like me, who's apparently my brother, and you're standing here trying to justify it." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. I was too far gone for sympathy. My mind raced, replaying every interaction we'd had over the past year. All those nights when she'd been working late, all those suspicious phone calls. It had all been building toward this moment. And now, here we were, standing in the ruins of our marriage. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered, wiping at her eyes. "I was angry. I felt betrayed by the secrets you kept. I didn't keep anything from you because I didn't even know." I snapped. "You think I knew about Nick? That I've been hiding him from you? You're out of your mind, Ashley." Her face crumpled, and she leaned against the counter for support. I don't know what I was thinking, she said, her voice barely audible. I guess I wasn't thinking. I wanted to feel close to someone who could give me answers. And he understood me in ways you didn't. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. You mean he told you what you wanted to hear? I said, my voice cold and clipped. Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You were looking for someone to blame, and when you couldn't pin it on me, you used him. Ashley didn't answer. She just stared at me, tears streaming down her face. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned on my heel and stormed out of the kitchen, needing space, air, anything to escape the suffocating weight of her betrayal. I made my way to the backyard and stood beneath the cold, distant stars. My mind was spinning with questions I didn't have answers to. How could my parents have kept something like this from me? Why would they separate us at birth? And what kind of person was this Nick? But above all, one question haunted me the most. How the hell was I supposed to move forward from this? I clenched my fists, the cool night air doing little to calm my rage. One thing was clear, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stayed outside longer than I intended, pacing back and forth on the cold patio stones, trying to process everything Ashley had told me. I wanted to believe there was some explanation that would make all of this easier to stomach. But there wasn't. The betrayal was real, and now I had an even bigger mystery on my hands, the brother I never knew existed. Nick. His name echoed in my mind like a taunt. I couldn't shake the image of him, how he had looked so much like me but had shared an intimate moment with my wife as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My wife had taken it upon herself to dig into my past, find this man, and then somehow cross the line with him. It was like a bad joke. A sick twist of fate. Eventually, I re-entered the house. The lights were off in the kitchen, and Ashley was nowhere to be seen. I heard the faint creak of the floor upstairs and knew she'd gone to the bedroom. I wasn't ready to face her again, not yet. I needed to dig into this myself. I needed the truth, my truth, without her version of events clouding everything. I grabbed my laptop and settled into the living room. If Nick was out there, I would find him. I wasn't about to sit around in the dark, letting Ashley control the narrative anymore. It didn't take long for me to pull up some initial search results. I cross-referenced names, adoption records, and even old hospital documents. I was shocked by how quickly some pieces started to fall into place. It seemed that Nick had been placed for adoption shortly after birth. While I had been raised by my biological parents, he had grown up with another family entirely. There were no traces of him in any of my family's records, no photographs, nothing to suggest I'd ever had a sibling. But there were hints of something being deliberately hidden, discrepancies in hospital discharge paperwork, a missing birth certificate, and vague legal references that hinted at a closed adoption. The rage inside me began to simmer again. My parents must have known. They had to. Why else would they bury something like this? I dug further, eventually coming across social media profiles. There he was, Nick. I stared at the screen, at the face that mirrored my own. It was eerie seeing him there, smiling with a group of friends in one picture, standing in front of a modest house in another. If I hadn't known better, I might have thought someone had photoshopped my face into these images. But this wasn't a trick. He was real. He was living a life completely separate from mine, and somehow Ashley had found him before I ever knew he existed. I clenched my jaw as the next question burned into my mind. What the hell had he been telling her? Did Nick know about me? Did he know I was his twin, or had Ashley kept that information from him too? I needed to know how deep this rabbit hole went. Without thinking, I opened my email and began drafting a message to him. But halfway through typing I stopped. This wasn't something I could handle through a few typed words on a screen. I needed to see him face to face. I closed the laptop and sat back, running my hands over my face. This was too much to deal with all at once. Ashley's betrayal. My family's secrets. The existence of a brother I had never met. It was like my entire world had been flipped upside down. I barely slept that night. Thoughts and questions chased each other in circles in my mind, refusing to let me rest. When the morning finally came, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Ashley was already awake when I walked into the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, nursing a cup of coffee. Her eyes were bloodshot, and it was clear she hadn't slept much either. We didn't speak at first. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, I broke it. "I'm going to find him." Ashley looked up sharply. "Nick?" "Yeah," I said, my voice cold. "I need to hear the truth from him. All of it. You might have gotten your answers, but I didn't. And I'm not going to keep living in the dark." "Jake, please," she said softly. "This isn't just about you anymore. Things have gotten so complicated." "No," I interrupted. "You made them complicated. You went behind my back. You kept me in the dark. You don't get to play the victim here." Her eyes welled up with tears, but I didn't care. I grabbed my jacket and car keys, heading for the door. "I'm done talking, Ashley. I need answers, and I'm going to get them." She didn't try to stop me. As the door clicked shut behind me, I felt a strange sense of resolve. This wasn't just about confronting Nick. It was about reclaiming control of my life. Whatever secrets were buried in my family's past, I was going to uncover them. And this time, no one was going to keep me in the dark. The drive to meet Nick felt surreal. The highway stretched ahead of me like a long, empty road to nowhere. The farther I drove, the more I questioned how I'd gotten here. Less than a week ago, my biggest concern had been figuring out why Ashley was acting distant. Now I was on my way to meet a twin brother I never knew I had, a man who had somehow become entangled in my wife's betrayal. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white. How the hell was I supposed to face him? What would I even say? "Hey, I just found out you're my twin brother. By the way, you've been screwing my wife." Yeah, that would go over great. I had managed to get his contact info from one of his social media pages. The message I sent was brief and direct. "Nick, we need to talk. It's important. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." To my surprise, he responded quickly, agreeing to meet at a small diner just outside his town. When I pulled into the parking lot, I took a deep breath, trying to steady the pounding in my chest. The place was quiet, with only a few cars parked outside. I scanned the lot and spotted him almost immediately. He was standing near the entrance, his posture relaxed but alert, as if he were waiting for something he wasn't sure he wanted to face. Seeing him in person was like looking into a distorted mirror. He was me, but not quite. His features were eerily similar, same jawline, same height, even the same damn haircut, but there were subtle differences. His face was slightly more weathered, like someone who had seen his share of hard times. As I approached, he turned and locked eyes with me. For a moment neither of us spoke. We just stared at each other, both clearly grappling with the absurdity of the situation. "You must be Jake," he said finally, his voice calm but cautious. "Yeah," I replied. "And you're Nick?" He nodded slowly. "Guess we have a lot to talk about." "Yeah," I agreed, swallowing hard. "We do." We walked inside and found a booth near the back of the diner. The waitress came by to take our orders, but neither of us was in the mood for food. I ordered a coffee just to have something in front of me. Nick did the same. For a few moments, we sat in awkward silence, both unsure how to begin. Finally, I decided to rip the bandage off. "I didn't know you existed until a few days ago," I said, cutting straight to the point. "I found out because of Ashley. My wife." Nick's expression shifted, a flash of guilt crossing his face. He leaned back in the booth and sighed. "I figured this was about her," he said quietly. "You knew," I accused, my voice hardening. "You knew who I was this whole time, didn't you?" "Not at first," he admitted. "When Ashley first reached out to me, she didn't tell me anything about you. She just said she'd found records of a long-lost sibling and wanted to know more about me. I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe you didn't want to be found or something. So when did you find out the truth?" I pressed. About a month in, he said, meeting my gaze. Ashley told me everything. That you were her husband, that we were twins. It was a lot to take in. A lot to take in? I repeated bitterly. Try finding out that your wife has been meeting your long-lost twin behind your back. Nick winced. Look, man, I didn't plan for any of this to happen. I wasn't trying to hurt you. Ashley and it just got complicated. Complicated, I muttered, shaking my head. Yeah, that seems to be the word of the week. He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. I'm not going to make excuses. I crossed a line, and I own that. But you need to understand something. Ashley wasn't just looking for answers about you. She was hurting. She felt like you were hiding a part of yourself from her. I wasn't hiding anything, I snapped. I didn't even know about you. If she had just talked to me instead of going behind my back, maybe none of this would have happened. Nick nodded, his expression grim. You're right. She should have talked to you. And I should have walked away when I found out who you were. I didn't. I fucked up. The bluntness of his words hit me hard. I wasn't expecting him to take responsibility like that. It didn't make the betrayal hurt any less, but at least he wasn't trying to shift the blame. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything hanging heavy between us. Finally, Nick spoke again. So, what now? Are you here to get closure, or are you planning something else? I don't know, I admitted. But I'm done being in the dark. I need to figure out where we go from here. All of us. Nick nodded. Fair enough. Let's figure it out. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of something resembling control. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least I wasn't facing it alone. The drive back home was quieter than it had been on the way there, but my mind wasn't. Meeting Nick had left me with even more questions, and now I had one overriding mission. I needed to confront the truth about my family. My parents had kept something massive from me, something that had defined my entire life without my knowledge. I couldn't rest until I got answers. But there was a problem. My parents weren't around to answer those questions. Dad had passed away years ago, and Mom had been gone for almost a decade. The only option I had was their old friend and executor, Aunt Linda. She wasn't actually my aunt, but she had been a close family friend for as long as I could remember. If anyone knew about this secret, it would be her. I called her on the drive back. Hey, Aunt Linda, it's Jake. I was wondering if we could meet up. I have some questions about my parents, about something I found out recently. There was a long pause on the other end before she finally replied. Of course, Jake. Come by tomorrow afternoon. I've been expecting this call for years. That response stopped me cold. Expecting this call? What the hell did that mean? The next afternoon, I found myself sitting in Aunt Linda's cozy living room. The walls were lined with photos, memories of my childhood and snapshots of family gatherings. I noticed for the first time that none of those photos included anything from the year I was born. In fact, there was a noticeable gap between my parents' wedding and my first birthday. So, Aunt Linda began, settling into an armchair across from me. You found out about Nick? I nodded, feeling my jaw tighten. Yeah. Ashley found some documents that led her to him. I had no idea I had a twin, Linda. Why? Why would my parents keep something like that from me? She sighed deeply, her eyes softening with a mixture of regret and sadness. It's complicated, Jake. Your parents didn't make that decision lightly. They were trying to protect you. Protect me? From what? I demanded. I spent my entire life thinking I was an only child, and now I find out I've had a brother out there this whole time. I deserve the truth. She hesitated for a moment before nodding in resignation. All right. You're right. You do deserve to know. But I need you to listen carefully because this isn't going to be easy to hear. I leaned forward, bracing myself for whatever bombshell was about to drop. Your mother had a difficult pregnancy, Linda began. When you and Nick were born, there were serious complications. You were both premature, and the doctors weren't sure if either of you would survive. But that wasn't the real issue. The real issue was your father's side of the family. What does my dad's family have to do with this? I asked, confused. Your grandfather was a difficult man, she said delicately. He was controlling, abusive in subtle ways. He didn't want your mother to have more than one child. He believed in keeping the family line clean, whatever the hell that meant. When your parents found out they were having twins, they were terrified of what he might do. Your father convinced your mother that the best way to protect both of you was to have one of you placed for adoption. I sat back, stunned. You're saying they gave Nick away because of some family politics? Because of my grandfather? It wasn't just politics, Jake. Your parents were trying to protect both of you from a life of control and manipulation. Your dad knew what it was like growing up under your grandfather's thumb, and he didn't want that for his children. They thought that by separating you two, you'd both have a better chance at a normal life. Normal? I scoffed bitterly. Yeah, because growing up with no idea I had a brother is real normal. Linda winced but didn't argue. They did what they thought was right. I'm not saying it was fair, or that it didn't cause pain. But they loved you both. Your mother regretted the decision for the rest of her life, but by the time she wanted to reconnect with Nick, it was too late. He had already built a life with his adoptive family. The weight of her words settled over me like a lead blanket. I had spent so much time feeling angry, at Ashley, at Nick, at my parents, but now that I knew the truth, I didn't know what to do with it. I still don't understand why they couldn't just tell me, I muttered. They were scared, Linda said gently. Scared of what it might do to you. They didn't handle it the right way, Jake, but they thought they were protecting you. I nodded slowly, the pieces starting to fall into place. It didn't erase the pain, but at least now I had a clearer picture of the past. So what now? Linda asked softly. I exhaled deeply. Now I have to figure out how to move forward. I need to talk to Nick again. And I need to decide what to do about Ashley. Linda reached over and squeezed my hand. Take your time, Jake. You'll figure it out. Driving home after talking to Aunt Linda, I felt like a storm was raging inside me. The truth was out now, but it wasn't exactly the clean resolution I had hoped for. It wasn't just about Ashley's betrayal anymore. It was about a life I could have had with a brother I never knew existed. My parents had hidden it all to protect me from a man I had barely even known, my grandfather, and now I was left holding the broken pieces. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Ashley's car parked there. I hesitated, gripping the steering wheel for a moment. Part of me didn't want to go inside, didn't want to face her again. But I couldn't keep running from this. I had decisions to make, and I needed to be clear-headed about it. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. I found Ashley sitting on the couch, her legs curled under her, staring blankly at the TV. The screen was on, but she wasn't really watching. She looked up when I entered, her eyes tired and wary. Hey, she said softly. You were gone all day. I had things to take care of, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She nodded slowly. Did you see him again? Nick? I asked. No. But I talked to someone else, Aunt Linda. She filled in a lot of blanks. Ashley straightened slightly, curiosity flickering in her eyes. What did she say? She told me the truth. About why my parents kept Nick a secret. About the family history I never knew. Turns out, my grandfather was some controlling bastard who didn't want twins in the family. My parents thought they were protecting us by separating us. Ashley exhaled and looked down at her hands. I'm sorry, Jake. I didn't know it was that deep. No, you didn't, I said, my voice hardening. But you still took it upon yourself to dig into my past without telling me. And then you dragged Nick into it, and made things even worse. I know, she whispered. I can't take it back, but I am sorry. For everything. Sorry doesn't fix this, Ashley, I said, crossing my arms. You lied to me. You went behind my back, and then you slept with him. Do you even understand how fucked up that is? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't let them sway me. I had been hurt enough. I was angry, she said, her voice cracking. I felt like you were shutting me out, like you were hiding parts of yourself from me. I made a horrible mistake, and I hurt you. But I never stopped loving you, Jake. I swear. Loving me? I shook my head in disbelief. You call this love? You don't betray the people you love, Ashley. She wiped at her eyes, silent for a long moment. I don't know what you want me to say. I know I fucked up. I know I broke your trust. But I want to make things right. How? I shot back. How the hell do you plan to make this right? You think we can just go back to the way things were? She flinched at the harshness in my voice but didn't look away. No. I know we can't. But maybe we can move forward, if you're willing to try. I laughed bitterly. Move forward? You really think we can move past this? Ashley, I don't even know who you are anymore. Every time I look at you, all I see is what you did. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she seemed to realize just how broken things really were. What are you saying? She asked quietly. I'm saying I don't know if I can forgive you, I replied honestly. I'm saying I need space. Time to figure out what the hell I want. Ashley nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. If that's what you need, I'll give it to you. But I'm not giving up on us, Jake. I meant it when I said I love you. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. The pain was too raw, too overwhelming. I'm staying at a hotel for a few days, I said over my shoulder. Don't contact me. I need time to think. Okay, she whispered. I grabbed an overnight bag and left the house without another word. The silence in the car felt deafening as I drove away, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. I knew I couldn't avoid these decisions forever, but for now, I just needed to breathe. That night, I lay on the stiff hotel bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed the events of the past few days on a constant loop. Ashley's betrayal. The truth about Nick. The secrets my parents had buried. It was too much to process all at once. For the first time in years, I felt completely untethered, like my life had been torn apart at the seams. And the worst part was that I had no idea how to put it back together. I woke the next morning with a dull ache behind my eyes. Sleep had been elusive, fragmented by waves of restless thoughts. The hotel room was cold and sterile, devoid of warmth, but at least it was quiet. It gave me the space I needed to think without Ashley hovering in the background, her presence a constant reminder of what had happened. I spent the morning staring out the window, watching cars pass by on the street below. For the first time in days, I tried to push aside the betrayal and focus on one pressing question: what did I want? There were only two paths forward: cut ties with Ashley completely, or try to rebuild. But rebuilding required forgiveness, and right now, forgiveness felt impossible. How could I forgive someone who had torn apart the very foundation of our marriage? Worse, how could I trust her again, knowing that the moment things got hard, she had turned to my own brother? Nick. Just thinking about him sent a fresh wave of bitterness through me. He had been a stranger only a few days ago, and now his existence had reshaped my entire life. Still, there was something in his eyes when we met, a look of regret that told me he wasn't proud of what had happened. Unlike Ashley, he hadn't tried to justify his actions. He'd admitted his fault and taken responsibility. I wasn't sure whether that made it easier or harder to hate him. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Nick. Hey. I've been thinking about everything. If you're up for it, I'd like to talk again. Just us. No pressure. Let me know. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part, the part that was sick of unanswered questions, knew I needed this. If I didn't deal with Nick now, the resentment would fester like a wound that refused to heal. I texted him back, fine. Let's meet at the park on 8th at 3 p.m. By the time I arrived, Nick was already there, sitting on a bench near the playground. Kids laughed and ran in the distance, their carefree energy a sharp contrast to the heavy atmosphere between us. He stood when he saw me, his hands stuffed awkwardly in his jacket pockets. "Thanks for meeting me," he said as I approached. I nodded and gestured to the bench. "Might as well sit." We sat in silence for a few moments, either of us sure how to begin. Finally, Nick spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since we talked. I know I said this before, but I'm sorry, Jake. I crossed a line I never should have crossed." "You're right. You shouldn't have," I said bluntly. "But I'm not here for more apologies. I need to understand something. Why? Why did you stay involved with her after you found out who I was?" Nick sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It wasn't that simple. At first, I didn't even know you existed. Ashley didn't tell me anything about you for weeks. When she finally did, I was already invested. We'd spent a lot of time talking, about family, about the pain she was going through. I thought I was helping her. By the time I realized how deep things were getting, I couldn't pull back." "You couldn't pull back?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "That's bullshit, Nick. You had every opportunity to walk away. But you didn't." "I know," he said quietly. "I was wrong. I own that. But you have to understand, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I didn't even know you. And to be honest, I was dealing with my own confusion about who I was and where I came from." I let out a bitter laugh. "Confusion doesn't excuse betrayal, Nick. You say you weren't trying to hurt me, but you did. Both of you did." "I know," he said, his voice firm. "And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I want to make things right. I want us to move forward, not just for Ashley's sake, but for ours. We're family, whether we like it or not." Those words hit me harder than I expected. Family. The concept felt foreign now, fractured beyond repair. Yet, despite everything, I couldn't deny the truth in what he was saying. Nick was my brother. I couldn't change that any more than I could change the events that had brought us to this point. "What does moving forward even look like?" I asked quietly. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think it starts with honesty. No more secrets. No more lies." I stared at him, searching for any sign of insincerity, but I found none. Maybe he really did want to make things right. Maybe we both did. "I need time," I said finally. "I'm not ready to forgive you. Not yet. But I'll think about it." Nick nodded, his expression serious. "That's all I can ask." We sat in silence again, the weight of the past few days still hanging between us. But for the first time, it felt like there was a sliver of hope, however small, that things could change. A week passed after my meeting with Nick, and each day felt like a small battle against the chaos that had taken over my life. I didn't go back home. Ashley respected my need for space, though she sent a couple of messages, apologizing again, saying she was giving me time but hoping I'd eventually talk to her. I read each message and left them unanswered. I wasn't ready. I spent most of my time in that hotel, caught in a limbo between anger, grief, and moments of clarity. I kept asking myself the same questions. Could I forgive Ashley? Could I rebuild the trust we'd lost? And more importantly, did I even want to? The answers weren't simple. I knew that no matter what happened, things would never go back to how they were. The old version of us, of our marriage, was dead. The only path forward was to decide if something new could rise from the wreckage. In the middle of all this, Nick reached out again. He didn't push for another meeting but sent a text saying he'd begun looking into more of our family's history. He had found additional adoption records and thought it might help give us more context about the choices our parents had made. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. This time, there wasn't the same tension hanging between us. We were both still cautious, but something had shifted after our last talk. There was a mutual understanding now, a tentative acknowledgement that we were both trying to move forward. Nick handed me a folder when we sat down. Inside were copies of adoption documents, hospital discharge records, and even a letter from my mother. My hands shook slightly as I opened the letter. The handwriting was familiar, though faded with time. "Jake, if you're reading this, then you've learned about Nick. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth while I was alive. Your father and I made choices we thought were best at the time, but I know those choices hurt both of you. I hope one day you'll understand that everything we did was out of love and fear of the man your father grew up under. We wanted to protect you. I just hope you can find each other again and build the bond you were meant to have. I swallowed hard, setting the letter down. It didn't make everything okay, but it gave me some measure of closure. My parents had lived with this secret for years, burdened by the weight of a decision they couldn't undo. Now it was on me to decide how to carry that legacy forward. You all right? Nick asked quietly. Yeah, I said, my voice hoarse. It's a lot to take in. I get it, he replied. I've been going through the same thing. I didn't grow up knowing much about my birth family, and now, all of this. He gestured vaguely to the papers. It's overwhelming. Yeah, I muttered, nodding. But maybe it's a chance for a fresh start. Nick smiled faintly. Maybe. Later that night, I returned to the hotel and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Nick's words stayed with me. A fresh start. Was that even possible? I thought about Ashley. Despite everything, there was still a part of me that loved her. I hated that fact, but it was the truth. Memories of our good years together fought with the bitter images of her betrayal. The woman I married was still somewhere in there, buried beneath the lies and mistakes. But did I have the strength to try to find her again? I didn't know. But I couldn't keep avoiding it forever. The next morning, I packed my things and left the hotel. My hands were sweaty as I gripped the steering wheel on the drive back home. When I pulled into the driveway, I hesitated for a long moment before finally stepping out. Ashley opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been waiting for me. Her eyes were cautious, hopeful, and filled with regret. Jake, she said softly. You're back. Yeah, I replied, my voice stiff. We need to talk. She stepped aside, letting me in. The house felt eerily quiet, as if it had been holding its breath during my absence. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same place where this nightmare had first started. I've been thinking. I began, meeting her gaze. I'm not going to pretend things can just go back to the way they were. You broke my trust, and I don't know if I'll ever fully get it back. But I'm willing to try. On one condition. Ashley leaned forward, her eyes wide. Anything. Full honesty, I said firmly. No more secrets. No more lies. We face everything head-on together. If you can't do that, then we're done. She nodded quickly, tears welling in her eyes. I can do that. I swear, Jake. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Good, I said, exhaling slowly. Because I'm not going to settle for less than the truth anymore. For the first time in days, I felt a small flicker of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least we were both stepping onto it with open eyes. Maybe, just maybe, we could build something new from the ashes.